This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to educator.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, leaders, today I'm honored to have Jennifer Gardner on the show. She is an attorney, a self-proclaimed tech geek, which we love over here. She's also a person who influences people and teaches people about the power and the art of influence, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And hopefully we'll get some skills and some tips that we can use today to help us with our influence and find out how to learn more and become more ambitious with our high-performing careers that we're going for. Anyway, with all that being said, Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. Happy to be here. Happy to share.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career, and what is it exactly that you do?
Well, exactly what I do is pretty much two things. I'm a litigator. I'm a trial lawyer. I have a lot of trial experience trying civil and criminal cases, although I no longer do criminal cases. In my civil practice, I represent businesses, individuals, mostly smaller to medium-sized businesses, in business disputes and real estate disputes and any kind of dispute involving reputation, money, property, intellectual property. And I also have served as a part-time administrative law judge for the County of Los Angeles for many years. And so I really exponentially grew the amount of time that I spent in a courtroom, either arguing and advocating for a client where I needed to get a result or watching other attorneys appear before me doing the same thing, trying to get a result, trying to get a decision, trying to get an outcome. So that is what I do. And the second thing that I do is I've been really obsessed, I think is the right word. I'm not going to mince words here, with understanding what it is that makes really great speakers, presenters, advocates, leaders, what qualities they have and what they're doing to motivate and inspire others. So that's what I do.
I think that's super important. And, I can think back a long time ago when I first became a manager for the very first time, and I wanted to learn how to manage people properly. And one of the first books that anybody ever pointed me to was a book about motivation. And it was by Daniel Pink. And it was all about like ways that you can try to motivate people, with autonomy, purpose, and what was the third one? It's been so long ago. But anyway, it's all about that. And I think that's a critical thing is how do you motivate people? And I find today that I struggle with that, not just as a leader, but also like as a parent. And, how do I motivate my children? How do I motivate, my employees? And it's just one of those things that's super important.
It's super important. I mean, everything we want is on the other side of yes. And so understanding how to get to yes is really important. And there's so many layers to it, which is, for me being the geek that I am when it comes to this topic, I just love diving into. So I enjoy researching and reading and practicing about the neuroscience behind decision making. And it's fascinating stuff.
So I know when I was first learning about negotiations and things like that, I always thought it was like a winner or a loser. But I'm starting to learn and hear about that in order to get to yes, you want both people to feel like they've won at the end. Is that kind of one of the things that you guys work with when you're teaching people about influence?
Absolutely. Because so much of our experience of a result is based in our mental perception of it, right? So of course, what's interesting is that when we're mediating in the legal profession and when we're negotiating, which is what we're doing in a mediation, The judges, I usually use retired appellate court and superior court judges for my mediations, and they will all tell you that in an ideal settlement, most parties walk away a little bit pissed. That's like the standard in the legal profession. If everybody feels like a little frustrated, like maybe they could have done better, or maybe they could have gotten more, or maybe they're just a little bit angry, then if both parties are in that spot, then that's the sweet spot for a resolution. So that's looking at it from another side, right? That's looking at it from not everybody being happy. But there's negotiation is a topic that I do it. I've done it for many, many years. There's a lot of things that I do naturally. I recently completed a women's executive leadership program at Wharton, and they spent some time on negotiation and presented new frameworks and new concepts that I hadn't even considered before because I don't have professional mediation training. My focus is really on the advocacy part, but it's really, really fascinating stuff. And I plan to dive deeper into that in the very near future. I mean, there were concepts that we discussed, such as the best alternative to a negotiated settlement, like knowing what that is going in. And then they also were discussing with us how, like, this ridiculously high statistic based on scientific research, that most CEOs of companies feel like they left money on the table at the end of a negotiation. So to question ourselves and doubt ourselves is really natural when we're going through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I think about negotiation, I always want to think about like you're talking about, what is the best alternative to to things. And I've told people before when they've asked me like, oh, if I'm getting a new job, how do I negotiate that salary? How do I negotiate things for the job? I said, well, don't always just hit on the salary. There's other things that come along with a job, and it could be that you negotiate more time off, or maybe you want to negotiate. Lunch with the CEO once a month or something like that to help build a relationship with others. Or there's other things that could be on the table that may not um, get as much pushback immediately as salary would.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we just need to know like what our goals are going in, and then we have to be prepared to expect that we don't live in a perfect world. No outcome is ever going to be perfect. And so many times in a negotiation, what you're doing is you're managing your risk, at least in a context of a dispute. And I'm sure that's also true when it comes to managing teams like you do.
So tell me about when you're talking about knowing your goals. Do you also know when to walk away? Like, what is that bottom part that you're not going to accept, and you know exactly where to step away and say, like, I'm done here, but this isn't going where it needs to go?
Um, yeah, absolutely. Although I can tell you that in the context of a legal dispute, that is always shifting and changing because you never completely know the other side's position. I mean, we're supposed to exchange information through the discovery process, but there's always unknowns that unfold as you go through the litigation process, and especially as you prepare for and you engage in an actual trial. So and then the bottom line is you can never predict with certainty how a decision maker is going to go, and and what they're going to decide, whether they're going to decide for you or against you. There's always, I mean, I've tried a lot of jury cases, and most experienced lawyers will tell you it's really, really hard to read people, especially when you're in that relationship. So absolutely. And then with decision makers as well, there are a lot of people out there, like you can be trying to lead up to a boss or sideways to a colleague or downwards to your team, and people can be nodding their heads and say, yes, yes. But what they're really thinking is something completely different. So what you want to be able to do is know how to push buttons to get them to give you the best possible outcome that you're looking for, to get as close as possible, understanding that there's a lot of unknown. I mean, humans are fascinating. They're fascinating people.
Yeah. So when you say push buttons, can you give me some examples of that? Because I know sometimes where you, like you mentioned, you're talking to people and they're nodding their head, they're acting like they're agreeing, but in reality, they're thinking, when I get home, I have to do this, this, and this, and not even engaged in anything that you're saying. So how do you get them engaged by pushing those buttons?
My experience has been, and the research supports this, that if you can play to the right side of the brain which is the emotional side of the brain, that people ultimately make decisions based on very usually primitive emotions. So a lot of decisions are fear-based. Like they want the solution, or they want to choose the person that makes them feel safe, for example. So fear is a huge motivator. But the bottom line is that we have a lot of emotions that someone who's trying to influence or persuade another person can play upon. And there's various ways that you can do that. But my personal experience has been an emotional approach. You don't just need emotion though, right? You need to also have the data. You have to have what they call system 1 and system 2 thinking, which is data and information, which appeals to the left side of the brain, and then the emotional piece, which appeals to the right side of the brain. But it's the right side of the brain that will overrule the left in making a decision. So you need both.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and you find that as you're talking to people, some people are driven, more by emotion, but they obviously need that little bit of data. And other people are driven more by data, but they need a little bit of emotional push as well. How do you determine who is who when you're talking to people or working with people, and where to draw that line? Because everybody's different.
That's a great question. I think it has to do with communication style, understanding what the style is of the person that you're trying to influence. Like, are they a no nonsense, really what we call direct communicator, for example? Or are they more considerate of other people and thinking about other people's well-being and benefit? Like, we really need to have a conversation where we're understanding who they are. And this requires empathy and listening, like real serious next level listening, and being quiet and understanding how to process the information that you're getting yourself. So you need to tune into yourself. And you also need to tune into your own feelings and put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Like, really consider who they are, what's motivating them, what's frightening them, what they're likely to feel like is going to be a good reward for whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. These are all things that go into the mix. It really takes a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to do this well. And you have to be facile with many different concepts in order to, I think, optimize your persuasiveness.
Yeah. And is that something like we can learn? Because I know for me, I've struggled my whole career with empathizing with people sometimes. And I can do it if I'm really intentional and I really try. I can empathize with people, but it doesn't come as natural. So like I have to intentionally set aside time, before a one-on-one with someone to actually try to put myself in their shoes and pretend like, okay, so I'm going to be meeting with so-and-so today, and they have, 2 children that they have to drive to school every morning before they come into the office. So what is that like? What is it like to take your kids to school? It's raining outside. This person has a 30-minute commute. What's that like? Those kind of things, to try to get myself into their mindset before having that to kind of empathize with them. Otherwise, I'm just business, and just, going. How do we kind of learn those skills and adapt to become better at the empathizing part?
Oh, that is such a good question. Well, first of all, you're doing it already because you're slowing down and you're taking the time before the communication starts to actually reflect on these things. We have to slow down so that we can even have the bandwidth to feel or anticipate how someone else might feel. So I think you're already doing it. But getting to the first part of your question, this is what's called emotional intelligence, and it can absolutely be learned. And you need to really focus on that and be intentional about that. Most CEOs and most leaders have a high level of emotional intelligence, the research shows. So that's one of the things that distinguishes them. It's not just a high IQ, they have a high EQ. And high EQ is a really good predictor of how far you're going to ascend and how effective you're going to be. And it's definitely something that you can work on. And I teach my people that one of the things that we need to do is eliminate the distractions, and we are all so incredibly distracted, especially right now. Eliminate the distractions and get quiet and start feeling the physiological and psychological feelings that we're feeling when we're contemplating a situation. Like, we really have to get to that level of analysis in order to develop our empathy skills and listen to the other person.
Yeah, I know a lot of times, especially with new leaders, and I struggle with this at the beginning too, is taking the time to listen, because we kind of feel like, I just got promoted. I need to prove myself. So I need to be the one that's sharing the ideas. But in reality,
Yeah.
I found like the better leaders, sit back and they listen first, and they take time to absorb what's coming in and understand it, and not just jump to a conclusion or jump to their opinion, but want to hear everybody else first.
Absolutely. When I'm managing a team, like in a larger case, I'm very concerned with how my people feel and whether they're
Mhm.
happy. And I'm about collaboration. I like to source ideas. And I think that better decisions are made and better outcomes are obtained when you aren't just leading from the top down, but when you're sourcing ideas from your team. And it's good to have a team that has different, individuals on it that have different strengths and different weaknesses, and then to source their ideas. They're more invested, they're more involved in the process when you do that. And they're a huge source of information that can be really useful in achieving whatever the goal is.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a time where you've used these skills in a case somewhere that you can kind of tell us about, and should give us an example of how you've been able to, take time to listen, empathize, and then use that along with your emotional intelligence to influence a decision one way or the other?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't ever assume that I know everything. I'm really open to getting the insight of whoever I'm collaborating with. I really value their insight. Almost every single time I ask one of my team members, whether it's a paralegal or another attorney, what they think about X, I get valuable feedback that just, I feel, augments and amplifies my feelings in a really beautiful way, and makes me even more effective for the client. As good as I am and as emotionally perceptive and empathic as I am, I always want to hear someone else's words to describe the same or a similar or a different feeling. And I really source that when doing my work, whatever that work is. So, and then in my cases, when I'm actually advocating for people, for clients, I should say, storytelling is a huge part of it. And the stories are very emotion based. I'm hitting on themes that are universal that just about anybody could relate to. I mean, that's the whole idea of a universal theme. It taps into the collective unconscious. I mean, these are the ideas that myth and fairy tale are all based in. These universal themes that humans have been telling stories, drawing upon for millennia, right? I mean, our whole history was oral and passed down from ancestors, and they all hit on the same universal themes that we still look to and work with today. I think that answered your question, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think so. And I love the fact you brought in storytelling, because that's one of the things that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but I think it's so important. And I always try to use a story or an example whenever I'm trying to, coach my team into a certain direction or kind of lead them into a path somewhere. I'll do it by telling a story, and because if you do it right, you're not just teaching somebody a right or wrong or a certain fact. You're making them feel a certain way. And I think that's where you trigger that emotion, because if you can make them feel a certain way, you can influence them and motivate them in a way that's, different than just telling them the facts. And I can think back about one example where our team was building a piece of software, and it was a really simple change that we're making to this form that technicians were using on the little app. And basically, when we made this change by, batching certain requests and compiling things together, we were able to let the technician that's, finishing up their day, filling out their paperwork at the end of the day so they can go home, finish up about 10 minutes earlier. And so the way we told them, it's not like, oh, we're saving the company 10 minutes of time, which is X number of dollars. What we said is, imagine you're a technician at the end of the day, you've worked 10 hours and you're ready to go home. If we can get you out the door 10 minutes sooner so that you can get home in time before the sun goes down to play soccer with your kid, or in time for dinner, with your wife, how's that going to make that technician feel? Which is a bigger impact than saying we're saving the company, $10,000 a day in hours or whatever.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's great. That's a super smart application of a storytelling skill. Absolutely. And you're also getting people to put themselves in someone else's shoes and imagine that and use that and tell like an anecdotal story as a reference point to get them to trigger an emotional response. I mean, that's brilliant. Bravo.
And what's great is that
Well
and it's
done.
like, and things that will come out of that was the team that's building that will also say, hey, what about this other group of people? Is there a way we can batch their stuff too and help, optimize their time and make it more efficient for them as well? And then it just kind of sets this motion going in where you're trying to optimize things everywhere. And, no longer are you giving the requirements and requests for people to do this. They're finding it on their own because they have this emotional investment into those ideas.
Right. They relate. It's personal. It's not just a task on the to-do list. It's something that they can, like, they have a visceral relationship to the idea and the problem that they're solving and the thing that they're trying to build and accomplish. I think that's great.
So, when it comes to, working with individuals or even groups, because I think that's a bigger challenge. And you mentioned a jury before, where you have like 12 different people you're trying to influence, and realizing that everybody's different. Everybody has something else. And you mentioned these universal truths and these universal stories, and that you can kind of, how do you know which ones to tap into when you have a group like that and you're trying to appeal to everyone in the group?
Oh my gosh, your questions are so good. I love them. Okay, how do you know? Well, when you're a lawyer, one of the reference points obviously is like what happened in this case. And a big one that I've been trained to look for is to search for the betrayal. Where was your person, your client? I keep saying person. It's interesting. Where was your human client betrayed by someone else? And in what way? And how did that happen? And then you can go to another level and look at the actual relationships. And then you can go to another level and look at the feelings that would be triggered by whatever the series of events were. And then you want to like picture and imagine certain scenes. And if you're practicing psychodrama, like a lot of my colleagues do, you might want to reenact them or have other people reenact them for you, play various roles so that you can see from a new perspective what actually unfolded here and how each of the players in this scene might feel, what their emotional experience might be. So what happened, the relationship between the parties is always one place to start when looking for a universal truth, searching for the betrayal, who betrayed who, how and why, and what feelings, not only facts and circumstances, but what feelings did that trigger, which led to the parties being in a huge conflict, right? So you want to look for that. And then universal truth. There's so many in addition to telling the story of a betrayal. I mean, every story involves and every conflict involves very basic human emotions, which are pretty predictable from between us humans. I mean, we all experience the same thing. We're all pretty much the same. It's just the facts and the circumstances and the geography might be different, but we all pretty much experience the same things. And understanding what those are is really, really important. So, for example, I'm trying to think of a case study that I could tell you without revealing anything that would be attorney-client privileged. That's a difficult thing for me to do, like right here by the seat of my pants. Yes, because I've represented thousands of people, or I've heard thousands of disputes over the years. So it's really difficult to select what one of those would be. But I would say the big one is like, look for where someone feels they've been betrayed.
Betrayal. Yeah, because I guess everyone has
Yeah.
gone through
Betrayal
something.
is huge.
Yeah, something at some point where they felt like, they were betrayed or someone didn't have their back or, they were kind of the scapegoat in a situation and has to kind of deal with that.
Absolutely. And in disputes that get really personal, like, for example, I've had disputes between brothers, between family members. There's sibling rivalry would be a theme, right? There's some people that are just still caught up in that sibling rivalry, those feelings and those emotions and those dynamics, and they project them onto whatever the dispute is, usually business or property in my case. And there are unhealed wounds from childhood that are being dealt with in the context of this fight in a courtroom between fully grown adults. So rivalry and the way that one person may feel cheated by a parent or the other one was favored more and they may be jealous. Jealousy is a huge one. Rivalry, like I just said, when you're telling a story, one thing to focus on is the struggle and the conflict going way back. So if I get a client who comes to my office with a legal problem, I don't just look at the legal problem. I want to understand the history of the relationship, how it's gone, the history of that individual's efforts to solve the problem. And it's never just like a clear ascending path that they're taking. And a really compelling story is never just all about the path to a victory. Every time you're on a path with the ultimate goal being the victory, you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have successes. You're going to have setbacks again. And this kind of conflict and struggle and tension between these dynamics are the things that we really want to play up. Life is messy. And the more that you can tell a story that touches upon the messiness, the more you're going to relate to the person who is the decision maker or the person who you're ultimately trying to influence to get a certain outcome.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the biggest parts when it comes to influence is building that connection, and that thing that you can kind of connect to with somebody, whether it be, relating to them, like you're saying, whether it be through story, through data, or a combination of that. You're going to have to find a way to get a connection, and that will drive the influence. Is that right?
100%. 100%. It's all about being able to connect. And then there are various things that we can do with the way that we speak.
Mm-hmm.
Not just what we say, but how we say it is really important in driving that connection. But you are 100% right. It's story, it's data, it's empathy. And then there are these techniques that you can use, like you can do mirroring and repetition and body language. And then the way that you stand, if you're standing, or the way that you sit in your chair when you're speaking also is going to have an impact on another person. Eye contact. Eye contact is super important in cadence, how quickly you speak, how slowly you speak to emphasize things. These are all factors that go into your effectiveness.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And these are all skills that not just, an attorney can use, but also like leaders need to use these, parents need to use these, teachers need to use these, and they're kind of universal.
They are universal and they're really important business tools. It's not just for lawyers. I mean, this is part of the leadership skill that they teach in some of the finest educational institutions in our country. For example, Wharton, where I've been a student, they're very focused on these, what we call soft skills.
Yeah, I like to kind of have hard skills because they're really hard.
They are. They're hard to master.
Yes.
But that's why it requires practice. You can have the book knowledge of what these things are, but you have to actually have opportunities or create opportunities or take opportunities to apply them in real life in order to get any kind of proficiency or even mastery at them. And executive presence, I mean, certainly there's some people who naturally have qualities that are going to make them have a higher aptitude towards having it. But understanding what the components are and then practicing these various components is critical to actually having it when it comes down to the wire and it's your turn to speak up or speak out. And it's a high stakes, usually, situation. I mean, if you're conscientious, you care about your result. If you're speaking up in the first place, you care about being heard, having your ideas come across and be accepted, getting buy-in, motivating people, influencing the outcome. All of these things really matter. And I think it's really naive to assume that we're going to have the book knowledge understanding, assuming you even have that, because so few people do. And then that you're going to have the book knowledge and then practice it and automatically excel at it the first time.
Right.
There's a whole other layer that we haven't gotten to yet, which is what happens to us when we're communicating in a high stakes situation. There's a whole physiological, neuroscientific piece of what's unfolding in our bodies when we're doing this. Most people are terrified of public speaking. They're not going to do it in the first place because of what it triggers in them, which is based on, data shows, scientists have proven that it's based on years and years and years of our evolution as a species. People are more afraid of speaking up and speaking out than they are of death. The research confirms that. I'm not pulling that out of thin air. So practicing these ideas, familiarizing yourself with what these ideas are, and then practicing them so that when you have the opportunity in a real life situation, you do better.
Yeah, I think practice is super important. And, you kind of mentioned that, through millions of years of, you didn't want to be the one in the tribe that kind of, was the outcast by saying something you shouldn't have said. And, you go back, even look at like scientists back, Galileo, he was excommunicated by the church because he said we weren't the center of the universe. Or, there's little things like that happen that you see a truth, but you don't want to share it because of the consequences that may come from that.
Absolutely. But sometimes we have to take an extreme position. Sometimes the position just is extreme and there are going to be risks that come with it. So if you're ambitious, do you sit back and not take that risk? If you really feel strongly about what your position is, do you say nothing? If you're motivated to say something, it's natural to still be afraid. And it's natural to have this parasympathetic nervous system response of freezing, stumbling and fumbling your words, forgetting what you want to say, wanting to run out of the room, becoming argumentative, reacting to what the other side is saying. Being able to manage that emotional response, it's called self-regulation when you look at it through a emotional intelligence model. You have to be able to self-regulate. And there's so much to process as it's unfolding in real time. Why do you think presidential debates are such great entertainment, right? Because we're assessing and we're looking at how everybody's responding. I mean, every micro expression, every gesture, every response is something that the audience is watching, and they're taking that as information and they're filing it away and deciding, is this person a leader or are they not?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And,
For example, I mean, like, come on, it's Halloween right before the 2024 election in the United States, and you and I are on both ends of the coast, so it's natural, I think, that politics is going to seep into our communication, but I'll stop.
yeah, well, so when he gets into practicing, one of the things that I always try to do is use technology to help me practice in one way or the other. If I'm going to be having a difficult conversation with someone, let's say I need to talk about their performance, I'll type it into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, can you help me have a conversation about this and, teach me some of the things that how could I have said this better?" And let ChatGPT kind of guide me. And then if I really want to take it to the next level, which most of the time I get lazy and I don't, but if I did, I could just pull up Zoom like we're having right now and Zoom with myself and record it. And then I can kind of see, like, what is my expression like? Am I looking down? Am I looking out? Am I paying attention? Do I look engaged? And see what are the things I need to step up on before I have this conversation to make sure that I am ready and I've gone through those steps. And I can do that without, embarrassing myself in front of somebody else. I can do it all practicing by myself.
So, John, if you were my student, I would give you an A plus plus plus, right? No, go to the head of the class. Honestly, the fact the fact that you're even using ChatGPT as like a tutor is brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah. I mean, I don't rely on ChatGPT. I use Claude and I use Gemini. And I don't rely on them, but I'm sometimes very curious, like what would their opinion be of my approach, right? What would its opinion be of my approach? And I always get some kind of little nuance or wrinkle that I hadn't considered before. I don't use it for legal research. However, that's a little bit dangerous. Not yet, but I have more sophisticated legal research tools for that. But for coaching me about how I want to spin something that I consider important, I'd love to get another perspective. And if I'm working alone, as many of us are, we can't go to the water cooler and have this conversation. Hey, John, what do you think? Right? ChatGPT is it's a great way. So, and then practicing on Zoom, absolutely. Absolutely. I do the same exact thing that you're describing.
Awesome.
Same exact thing.
So, what are some other things that people can do real quick before we wrap up to learn more about influence and maybe connect with you online and get some help from you if they need to?
Oh, absolutely. Well, just so you know, I run a program called the Power Lab that I offer along with a little course. It's called The Art of Influence. It's not so little, it's pretty weighty, but they go together. So The Art of Influence basically discusses these concepts and more. We go a lot deeper, and and then I also offer Power Lab sessions where people get a chance to practice using some of these ideas and getting used to or accustomed to feeling stressed when they're speaking up and speaking out in high stakes situations. So in order to find out more information about that, they can go to my website, jenniferbgardner.com, and that should have all the links to everything. I recently launched another one, but my people tell me I shouldn't be giving out two websites, but I'm on LinkedIn at Jennifer B. Gardner, and that has everything. All roads lead to Rome. So anything that they're interested about, they can find me in those two places. Also, I do custom work one-on-one with people, and including lawyers, not just lawyers, but non-lawyers too, in different sectors of the economy. And I also custom design trainings for businesses. So, people bring me in and ask me to teach the people these ideas and practice with them. And that's what we do.
Awesome. And I'll link those in the show notes too at educator.com so people can go there and click through to your LinkedIn or to your website and find out more about the art of influence. And Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Don, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about these concepts with you and your audience.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.